I go about this a different way. I have explained this for the last several years. If you're new to the program, I do not put a lot of investment into my long-range conference and playoff predictions. Last year, I think I picked Georgia to win the East, and then I flipped it after week 1. And someone came to me and said, you can't change your pick once a week's gone by. Well, I can, because I don't put a lot of stock in them. Now, the week-to-week picks, I put a ton of stock in, as you can see later on in the show tonight. But these, no, I'll cheat on them. But having said that, you got to nail me down before the season starts. So here we go. Let's take a look at the SEC first. In fact, we can take a look at the whole thing if we want to, Jesse. In the SEC, kind of showed you the records the other day, but we're going Alabama versus Georgia in the SEC championship game. I have both of these teams going 11-1 in the regular season. You see on the screen the odds to win the SEC championship. So Alabama is the current favorite in the clubhouse, and it makes sense to me. We've got them ranked as the #1 overall team in the country. Georgia, I think we have at 5. Vegas has them at plus 225. We've got Alabama versus Georgia in Atlanta. This was not some slam dunk for me on the western side. On the eastern side, it was. But it's not a slam dunk with me for Alabama. I may change my opinion on them after I see them in Miami or against Miami. But I've got a feel about Alabama, mainly because I've listened to Nick Saban talk the last couple of weeks. And he's been kind of brutally honest about his team and sharing with you and everyone else that I don't know. I think some facets of this team are kind of a work in progress. Offensive line, kind of a work in progress. So Alabama, Georgia, we would make this game with our own model, our own in-house model. If we played this one today, we'd have Alabama -5. So we don't see a massive gap between those two teams. The thing that's aggravating, if you're on the Georgia side of this equation, is this is the year. I mean, I was talking to a personnel type about a month ago who said, if you're getting Bama, this is the year to get them. I mean, they are very, very green at a number of places that they're so talented in. But if you're going to get them this year. Those next couple of years, they're going to be as loaded as they've ever been. They've had the best recruiting classes they've ever had, including the last one that was the best in history. So get them now. And so you think about that, and Georgia's got quarterback figured out, or so you tell yourself all summer. And then you get into a game, and yet you look at them, and they're still a dog to Bama. Now, that doesn't mean everything because they've been underdogs to Bama before, but this is the time you got to beat them. And yet, as we sit here right now, we've got Alabama beating Georgia in the SEC championship game. So there's that. We move on to the ACC championship game. This one probably a little more clear-cut. Clemson versus North Carolina. Again, one side of this division pretty easy. I don't see a path where Clemson's not there. There is a path where North Carolina's not there. Now, it probably has a lot to do with Miami. You could make arguments for other programs. But if this game were to happen, if Clemson, North Carolina happened today, we make Clemson a 13.5-point favorite. This is not Vegas. This is us. This is our model talking. In other words, this is how we think the game would actually turn out, or at least the model does. If North Carolina has 2 losses, which our model predicts them to have, we think they're 10-2 going into this game. I've got to believe that means that one of those 10 wins was against Miami. Because if that game goes the other way and North Carolina's got a couple of losses, which I would assume are going to be conference losses, then it could very well be Miami parked in this spot. But you're looking at the odds there if you're watching on YouTube to win the conference. It's Clemson, by a country mile and then everyone else. I think you're overthinking the room here if you try and find a path for anyone other than Clemson. Not that it's impossible, but how is there any skill sitting here in August for forecasting that? I don't think there is. So we're taking Clemson over North Carolina to win the ACC. In the Big Ten, kind of a duplicate of the first two. There is a pretty clear path, as it appears, for Ohio State. So we got the Buckeyes in Indianapolis. And then we've got Wisconsin. These are the 2 preseason favorites in those respective divisions. These are the top 2 at least favorites to win the conference. Again, there's a wide gap between favorite number 1 and then runner-up there. Ohio State minus 225 to win the conference. Wisconsin checking in a distant second at plus 750. Notice Penn State there floating around the 3rd spot. They play Wisconsin in week 1. For the record, the JP poll has Wisconsin and Penn State ranked 8th and 9th. So we like both of them higher than the AP does. I believe Tier 2 of the Big Ten is very strong this year. The question becomes, how close does the top of the second tier come to rubbing up against the first tier? Because Tier 1 is a tier of 1, and that is Ohio State. Now, that could all change if they were to drop a game against Minnesota and they look vulnerable, but they're favored by about 2 touchdowns for a reason in that one. We'll talk about the game more this week. We have got Ohio State versus Wisconsin. If the game happened today, we would have Ohio State as a 14-point favorite. 2 touchdown gap there. We're not going to go out on any thin ice, any thin limb. We're going to take Ohio State over Wisconsin to win the Big Ten. In the Big 12, this is where we're sort of hitting the manual override button a little bit. I kind of showed you this the other night. We've got Iowa State at 11-1 facing an 11-1 Oklahoma team in the Big 12 title game. It's important to note the model thinks both teams have a loss by the time they get to the Big 12 title game. There are no divisions here, so you're just taking the top two teams. As far as conference odds go, if you're looking on YouTube right now, Oklahoma's minus 170 to win the conference. That is not overwhelming. But yet, if you suggest anyone other than Oklahoma is going to win this conference, you get a ton of national blowback. And I think there's a perception reality thing here, because Iowa State's plus 280 to win this thing. Texas is next at plus 1,000, which even as I look at it seems a little weird, but they're plus 1,000. The point is, this is not viewed as some unclosable, insurmountable gap by odds makers. So here's what we have. This is the only game I manually overrode. If these two teams played today in neutral field, we'd have Oklahoma minus 8.5 to about minus 9. And yet, it's an angle I'm playing. Now, I think I've got the angle pretty hardwired, so I'm not changing on that. We are taking Iowa State over Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. That's not something I'm shifting on. Where I could shift is I'm looking at the schedule right now, and I could easily see Iowa State being 11-1 and Oklahoma being 12-0 when they go into that game. Now, think about that for a second. If the same outcome we just predicted plays itself out, that probably means that, well, obviously Oklahoma's beaten Iowa State regular season. Iowa State gets them back in the Big 12 title game. Here's the question I'd love to pose. We don't know what the rest of the country would look like. Is it possible for the Big 12 to have two teams in the playoff? If that particular scenario played out, OU's only loss is very close, competitive against a top 5 team themselves that they already beat once, and that's their only blemish, a conference title game? You got the Notre Dames of the world floating around out there that don't even play in a conference title game, and you're going to get dinged and bumped out of the playoffs because you were in one? Just interesting fodder here in August. And lastly, over on the West Coast, we've got the Pac-12 championship game, Oregon versus Utah. Both of these teams are 2-loss teams according to the model. So we've got Oregon 10-2, we got Utah 10-2. We would make this game Oregon minus 3.5 if they played it right now. This conference, ironically, is viewed as the least likely to have a playoff participant, but it's the one that fascinates me the most because I think the Pac-12 South especially is going to be very competitive, kind of a knife fight. I just don't know if they're going to be those plastic McDonald's knives or if they're knives that can do some real damage. If they are, and if there is a clear-cut favorite out of the Pac-12 South, then you got to ask yourself, is there one or maybe two teams capable of getting to this game with fewer than 2 losses? Could we get a 1-loss Utah there? Or UCLA, they looked pretty good yesterday. USC, Arizona State, no one knows what to make of them right now. You know, as far as the North goes, I just think Oregon's the better team, and that's why I picked Oregon out of the North. But the model has them with a couple of losses. If either of these is a 1-loss team and they end up being a 12-1 Pac-12 champion, then you have to ask yourself, well, is a 1-loss Pac-12 champ capable of making the playoff? The answer, of course, is most always it depends on what the rest of the field looks like. But we got Bama over Georgia, we got Clemson over North Carolina, Ohio State over Wisconsin, Iowa State over Oklahoma, and Oregon over Utah. Take a look, if you're watching right now, what stands out the most aside from Iowa State? That one's going to get a lot of pushback, but I'm pretty adamant about that. Again, it's just an angle I think I have on it. I'll explain it as the season goes on. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. It has happened before. Also, I could just switch that week 2. I mean, Iowa State could lose to Northern Iowa for all I know, and I could switch it week 2. I reserve the right to. You also reserve the right to throw these predictions in the trash if you don't value someone who does that, because I would totally understand it.